if their customers want paper currency, tell me, what are they going to do? What are they going to use to satisfy their own customers' demands? You can talk, right? This isn't a mute class, is it?
They print their own?
No, they can't. It's legal, right? Monopoly means only the Bank of England can issue notes, right?
They bought from the Bank of England.
They have to take them from the Bank of England. So what they're going to do is they're going to stock up on Bank of England notes. Just like your bank now stocks up on Federal Reserve notes because it can't issue its own, right? They're going to fill their vaults and their tills with this inventory of these notes. And guess what they're going to do? If they get more of these notes for the Bank of England, are they going to send them back and tell the Bank of England they want gold? No. They're going to treat the Bank of England's notes as if they were gold or better than gold and treat them as reserves to be reissued. So now the Bank of England, even at the time when it's responsible for converting its own notes into gold, finds that it doesn't normally have to do that, at least for the sake of other banks, who would just as soon hold its own IOUs and treat those as their proximate reserves. So now what happens if the Bank of England expands? If it decides to lend more generously, say because the government has come for yet some more money, right? Well, it expands, and the banks get more reserves. For them, it's just more reserves. So what do they do if they're trying to maintain the reserve ratios? They expand too. They expand their deposits, right? They can't issue notes, or they're very limited in their ability to issue notes. Here, look here. Right, so now pretend this is a chart for the competitive banks, and this is their supply of reserves, right? Now there's a Bank of England behind the scene. It expands. What's happening on this chart? And, right? And increase M times V, hold output Y constant, what goes up?
Prices.
What?
P.
P. Yeah, but you're a teacher. I'm asking them. I know you know. P goes up, right? Right? Prices go up. That's inflation. You have a single bank that can lead the system, as I said, Piper-like, into an inflation. Because the normal checks and balances of the interbank competition check and note clearing process don't apply to the privileged central bank. Right? Right. So what does? Anything? Answer, yes, in the long run. So long as you're on a gold standard, and other countries are too, this man's doctrines become relevant. This man is David Hume, and he described something that's since been known as the price-specie flow mechanism. Here's how it works, right? France and England are both on the gold standard, right? Therefore, you can say that there's a gold price for a basket of goods in France and a gold price for the same basket in England. Let's suppose the price is the same in both at first. And let's suppose in France nothing's going on with the banking system that's making prices go up. But in England, the Bank of England expands, and as we've seen, it can cause a general increase in prices because there's no short-run chain gang type discipline in that system. Prices rise in England, but now at a certain point they become so much higher than prices in France that they're higher by more than the cost of shipping goods. Then what happens? You don't talk very much down here. What happens?
You import goods from France?
More importation of goods from France. So people now want to go shopping in France for goods that are cheaper in gold terms there than in England. They start cashing in their Bank of England notes, and this is going to drain English reserves, and the Bank of England is going to go, oops, we overexpanded, right? Because they can't see this coming. They don't have any price level measures, and even today we can't measure price levels in different countries with any great consistency. So the Bank of England may unknowingly cause an international monetary disequilibrium such that suddenly there is an external drain of gold. And at that point, guess what the English bank is going to, the Bank of England is going to do? It's going to contract dramatically to save itself. And guess what that's going to do to the rest of the banks in England? It's going to force a credit crunch on them, and it's going to create a financial crisis. That is the story of the typical 18th and 19th century financial crisis under central banking arrangements that existed at that time. They were constantly running beyond the limits of international equilibrium, and that was making them ultimately have to contract dramatically and precipitate a crisis. Here's an illustration, by the way, of Hume's ideas. As long as the price levels in the two countries, this is England, this is France, which is assumed constant, if they're close enough together within the gold points which describe the cost of shipping goods internationally, then no problem. But if the English price level rises too much relative to France, then gold's going to be pouring out of England toward France, and eventually this price level had better come down. But that's where the crisis comes in, right? That's how crises happen.
But that crisis would help equalize the price of gold again in each of the countries. So eventually it would be clunky, but it would return to some kind of equilibrium.
Right, right. But like they say about going down Niagara Falls in a barrel, you know, it's smooth sailing at the top and it's not bad at the bottom, but the transition is a real bitch. Now, if you look at this table, I should probably hold this till later, but I want to show you how frequent banking panics and financial crises were. I hope I used that term in a sufficiently technical way just then, so that I won't get in any trouble. The United States had the most banking crises. Now I'll get to why, but look at England. It had crises all the time. Look at France. Well, let's not worry about France, Germany, Italy. Look at England, right? See all those crises? Look at Scotland. This was a minor one. And there's no regulation of the Scottish banking system of any importance till 1845, and even then it was limited. At first it hardly had made any difference. Look at it. Scotland was a remarkably crisis-free place when England was having crises all the time. And I've just told you why. For a big part of the story. How many of you have heard of Walter Bagehot? If you ever read The Economist, you might know there's a page there called Bagehot. It's an opinion page. Bagehot was the most famous editor of The Economist, actually the second. But he was famous for something else as well. He wrote a book in 1873 called Lombard Street. Now, Lombard Street is the original Bible of the lender of last resort concept. It was Bagehot who first, well, actually it was Henry Thornton, but never mind. It was Bagehot who most famously recommended that the Bank of England act as a lender of last resort. That is, it must lend freely at high rates on good security during periods when there are external drains, during crises involving external drains of specie, gold or silver. Modern central bankers like to say, see, Bagehot, that's why you need us. You need a lender of last resort. And that's what we're here for. Walter Bagehot said so. Every time Walter Bagehot hears a central bank talk like that, assuming he can, he spins once or twice in his grave. What Bagehot was really doing in Lombard Street was pointing out how dangerous the Bank of England's monopoly was, how it would have been better if England never had such a monopoly, how England would have been much better off with a banking system like Scotland's, where each bank manages its own reserve and no banks create reserves for the rest. And the doctrine of the lender of last resort for Bagehot was his recommendation on how the Bank of England should be made to behave in order to limit the extent of damage caused by crises of its own making. It was, that is, the lender of last resort doctrine was a second best solution. First best, abolish the Bank of England. So if you ever hear anyone say that Bagehot and the lender of last resort concept provided a rationale for the creation of central banks, you're being told a myth. I had this in nice font too, but here it is with the other stuff. This is from the last pages of Lombard Street, in case you believe that I am misrepresenting Bagehot. So, from the horse's mouth. You don't talk and maybe you can't hear, so I'll read this. Or I mean, can't see. I know it will be said that in this work I have pointed out a deep malady, and only suggested a superficial remedy, that is, the lender of last resort. I have tediously insisted that the natural system of banking is that of many banks keeping their own cash reserves